All right. Hi, hello, good evening to all of you. I've been told that we are live, and I'm really excited to be doing this session with Blogchatter. It's the first virtual workshop that I'm doing. And to be honest, it's a little weird because usually I can see the people that I am interacting with, and all I can see right now is my face. So to look at yourself, this is almost like mirror talking. However, we are here to discuss a great topic. We're here to do like a mini workshop on spoken word, and it'll be great if you can keep pouring in your questions, if any, and we can pick them up either in the middle or towards the end of this about say 25 to 30-minute long session. So, hi, my name is Saumya. I write. I love writing. I love reading. My exposure to spoken word is more in the prose monologue format rather than the poetry format. However, I have done my bit in terms of judging enough poetry slams in this city, in colleges. When I say city, I mean Delhi. I'm from Delhi. And thankfully, we have a thriving culture of poetry and recitations and gatherings and mehfils and bazms and the slam culture, here. So here are two cents before we get into any sort of a process. Here are two cents on trying to understand what the spoken word format is all about. The spoken word format, first and the foremost, is about writing and emoting and putting your heart out there. Of course, it's extremely hot these days with the amount of videos that are coming in, with the amount of what do you say, online traction around it, and even social buzzes around it. And it's great if you can participate in it, and it's great if you want to be a part of it. And if you haven't yet been, then perhaps today is the day that you start. So a couple of quick questions, right? I said that it's essentially writing and speaking your heart out. And I always like to revisit these couple of points by Oliver Sacks, So he wrote down some scribble somewhere in his diary as to why do people write? And spoken word also begins at writing. So he said people write to understand, to put into perspective, to describe, to explain, to share, to speak for others, to express themselves, to recollect, to tell stories, to relate, to narrate, to find verbal equivalence, to define, to categorize, to generalize, to create beauty, to seduce, to evoke. And later, he added, after he was done with this list, that to praise, to condemn, to lament, to thank, to palliate, to reinforce, and to solicit. Now, that's an exhaustive list, but still not exhaustive enough because you can find your own reason to write. And so you figured that out for yourself. Insofar as the spoken word is concerned, it's a slightly more evocative and provocative form of performance. And if I begin with, say, poetry or even monologues, right? If you try and Google when did spoken word start, it'll give you a year. It started in the Americas in the 1980s, and I read somewhere 1984 to be precise. However, it's rather interesting to think about the fact that oral performances or oral literature, or what we also call orature, and performances in spoken word, that existed far before the dawn of writing as an organized art and craft that we know of today. I mean, initially there was no writing, but there were bards and there were orators, and they would go around singing, composing, passionately delivering stories of great kings. There were philosophers addressing massive audiences, again, passionately delivering content, passionately delivering text, the way it would get persuasive, the way it would influence and impact. And cut to, the 21st century where all of us are, we have enough means of communication. But tell me, what eventually matches up to the power of a well written line, well spoken? This is the simplest terminology under which you can understand and deconstruct for yourself the art of spoken word. And Our times are blessed with great spoken word artists. We have, of all of the international names. I will just tell you that I don't follow a lot of international poetry, but I have been lucky enough to listen to a lot of slam poems in person. So I used another terminology here: slam poetry or poetry slams. They are another. That's another terminology very very popular in the spoken word circle, and it kind of means the same thing, but the only difference is when performance poetry or when spoken word becomes competitive, or when poets gather in order to compete or be in this little nice pleasant social competition with each other. We call this a slam. In a slam, usually judges are not predefined. They are gathered from the audience itself. So when I was discovering spoken word poetry, and of course, I began very differently. I began by organizing formal gatherings, more like mehfils, that were linguistically agnostic, that were genre-wise agnostic, age agnostic. Nothing. I mean, anyone could come and recite anything. And per gathering, they started happening about 3 to 5 years ago, 3 to 4 years ago, that a certain category of very, very evocative poetry started happening. And I didn't know till then that that was called spoken word. That was a progressive discovery. So initially, मैं ऐसे समझाती थी that spoken word is the street theater of formal poetry. So what street theater is to performance on stage, uh, spoken word is to what formal, uh, what do you say, poetry recitations would be like, because this takes poetry out to the masses, in between all of them, and talks to them about things that matter either to the poet or which should matter to the society at large, right? So that's a little bit of background. Now, insofar as because this is a workshop, that's what I've been told. Insofar as becoming a part of spoken word is concerned, there are two segments to it, right? I mean, there is the writing segment and there's the delivery segment. If I pick up specifically the writing segment, spoken word poets or spoken word performers um, deal with very specific kind of issues. Uh, Technically talking, of course, issues can be anything, but these are things that they feel passionately and deeply about. These are things, like I earlier said, that the society at large holds concerns towards. And mostly the kind of spoken word poems that I've deeply enjoyed and I also think are societally relevant have dealt with issues of identity, of gender, of sexuality, of body, of politics, of communities, of existence, and have been sort of naturally subversive in nature. A spoken word poet is not out there to lilt the crowd or to cause a certain sort of gentle somnolence amongst his listeners. He is rather out there to evoke, if not altogether provoke. And that is the beauty and that's the challenge of this kind of poetry. Sometimes it tends to get extremely loud and verbose, because while we know the issues, we are not entirely sure of how to communicate those issues out to our audience. So I always advise when I'm taking any kind of writing workshops that any kind of public oriented writing needs to have needs to have a lot of you, but also a little bit of the audience incorporated into it. Eventually, if there is a certain life experience that you've had, which has been jarring, which has the potential to involve an entire audience, which has the potential to affect a certain audience, then we also need to factor in the fact that it has to be constructed in a manner that impacts that audience. And while content as language plays a very important role there, stylistics play an equally important role. By stylistic, I mean that the kind of figures of speech that you would employ while writing a spoken word poem, and I'm going to stick to poem for now, though no one will deny the fact that what Martin Luther King spoke out in I Have a Dream is anything less than a spoken word performance, but I'm going to restrict myself to poetry just for the sake of this interaction with all of you. So I was saying that stylistics, the kind of figures of speech that you employ while writing or composing a normal standard traditional poem is very different from the kind of poetic devices that you're supposed to employ while writing a spoken word poetry. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, in case of poems that read well on paper, you would use a lot of aesthetics which evoke images, which evoke comparisons, uh, which are, for the lack of a better word, imagery oriented, that can paint a picture in your head. And so, figures of speech like imagery, personification, like metaphors, conceits, these are more employable while you're writing traditional poems. Insofar as writing spoken word poetry is concerned, you have to be very mindful of using poetic devices that are of phonic aesthetics, that carry aesthetics of phonetics, of phonics. Phonics aesthetics bolte hain usko, if I'm not completely wrong. Uh, what are these kind of aesthetics? These include poetic devices like alliteration, repetition, rhyming. If rhyming sounds extremely, terribly conventional to you, um, think of employing internal rhyming. So, for example, she was crying while flying and vying for her place in the society. Now, suddenly, because of that repeated sound of ing, which I think it forms a part of another figure of speech called assonance, if I'm not wrong, uh, it sort of leaves a phonic impact, right? So you use a lot of repetition, though at appropriate places. You build, and I haven't seen a lot of spoken word poets do this, but I think it's great to build refrains. It's great to build that one or two very, very focused, very, very emphatic lines which get repeated at critical points during your composition. You have about 3 to 5 minutes in front of your audience in which you have to affect, impact, convince, influence. And words are your only tools, right? I mean, your thought might be massive and beautiful, but what goes in front of the audience are just words and the construction and the wordplay. You have to use them effectively, evocatively, right? One more thing I would mention insofar as the writing is concerned, and then we would go to the delivery aspect of it, is how do you figure out what you feel the most deeply about, and how do you perhaps sit down and write your first spoken word poem, which is assuming that you haven't written one as yet, right? There's a little activity I love doing with my students. So I teach. I teach in schools, colleges, um, NGOs, wherever I can, wherever I have an eager audience. I'm more than happy to drop in there and share my 2 cents. So I make them do this quick exercise, and I tell them that you take out a pen, you take out a paper, and you just start scribbling. You don't have to stop to think. I mean, you're always thinking, but you don't have to stop to really mull over what you're writing. Just go out there and write. And usually what happens is that gems out of their own psyche reveal themselves in the process, which they weren't aware were lurking somewhere at the behind of their brain in utter latency, in an utterly latent state. So yeah, it's great what happens when you are writing under pressure. Your fears of expression get abandoned, and spoken word is a lot about fearless writing, right? And you can refine this process for yourself. Think deeply, deeply, deeply about a topic that really affects you, and then just lash out on the paper, right? Just see what are the instantaneous thoughts that are coming out, and later edit. Like they say, write drunk, edit sober. I'm a great believer in editing as well, and pure editing as well. right? So while you might edit to the best of your capacities and capabilities, it's always great, especially if you're going out into the public and performing, and you have a certain public responsibility in that case as well, to have a friend for a sounding board in front of who you can do your initial recitation, which you can later refine into a performance, right? So I've spent a lot of time on the content and the writing process. Let's transition to the delivery aspect of it now. Ever since we were young, we've been asked to recite poems, everything from Johnny Johnny Yes Papa to later poems like The Woods Are Lovely, Dark and Deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Now, how is that kind of recitation different from what we're talking about under spoken word or performance poetry? Well, it's massively different. Uh, Conventional recitation is more contained, it's more lilting, and which is fair, right? I mean, poetry began for the purpose of being heard. Poems are supposed to be heard, not just read. So the next time you have a poetry book open in front of you, just ensure the fact that you are mumbling the poems along, if not entirely reciting them out loud, because the kind of impact that words have in you when you're just reading them vis-a-vis when you're hearing them changes. Now, the impact of hearing changes manifold and rises manifold insofar as spoken word performances are concerned. Your performance has to have an element of drama, though not overdone. Now, believe you me, I've been judging competitions where someone is relating things that happened in childhood and they're shrieking, and it doesn't come out naturally. A naturally evocative style is always preferred to something that is getting overtly dramatized. And how do you attain this fine balance, or this degree of performative ease? Is through practice. Memorization and practice and practice and memorization and practice. To spoken word poetry, that is critical. The impact, I believe, reduces greatly if a spoken word poet has, and that's also a rare occurrence. I've not really seen spoken word poets have papers in front of them. They are usually without a paper. They look the audience in the eye. Eye contact is another tip. It's essential that you have it with the audience. And stance. So spoken word poets don't slouch, and they don't even stand in a contained posture. Spoken word poets take a stance. So I can't show this to you because I'm stuck with this thing. But you get up and you stand with your feet slightly apart, and you ensure that you're not shifty enough to bend either of the knees. So you do not shift your weight to either of the knees, right? So shift on both your legs, bend slightly forward. That fixes or locks your stance. And then you take a while to look at the audience around you and make sure that the first line or the first few lines you deliver are slow, deep, and they catch the audience by their very collars, right? And then your job is only twofold. You either provoke a certain emotion in the audience, or you evoke a certain reaction from them. Depends upon what is the topic that you've chosen. So, with traditional Greek poetry, and it's interesting, we've come a full circle right from the earliest of times. So traditional Greek poetry and art had a purpose. That purpose was catharsis, purging of the most deeply set and the most deeply felt emotions inside you. Spoken word poetry is cathartic in nature, not just for the writer, but for the listeners as well. I have seen gatherings in which the the response of the audience is not just loud cheers, but very, very, very needed tears. And Now that I've mentioned the audience, yes, oh, how did I forget this? A very essential element of the slam culture is snapping. Your poet is performing, so and he's performing things that will force you to cheer all out, please. Spoken word poets love encouragement, love building an atmosphere, and if you are at the poet's end of stuff, remember, audience engagement is primary. Even if your content is great, it's not delivered well, or if your delivery is great but your content is not structured well, it's not the best of places to be in, right? And one of the distinctive ways in which the audience, in case of slam poems or in case of spoken word poetry, engage is via snapping. Your poet is performing on the stage, he's taken the mic, he's looking an audience in the eye that is huge. So we usually do a milder form of cheering, which is snapping, and not completely what do you say, unhinged the poet due to loud cheers and claps. Though you can completely certainly do that. I've seen that established poets enjoy it. I remember towards the beginning of this session, I said that I don't listen to a lot of international poets, but I've been fortunate enough to listen to enough of them in Delhi, and I'm fortunate enough to have had a gang of them of my own. And amongst my complete favorites are Pratik Pandey, Ishan Chaudhary. Oh my God! If you find a video of him, or you find him anywhere on the streets of Delhi, just like catch him by the collar and ask him to perform. You're gonna thank me later, right? You can connect with me anywhere. Do thank me later. That boy does magic while maintaining a very silent, a very composed, but a very well enunciated and a very well intoned, what was I saying? So basically, Ishan manages to be composed. He doesn't over dramatize, but through effective modulation and intonation and knowing where to pause, where to look the audience in the eye, where to just smile, and where to lead them on from there. This boy knows that perfectly. Another of I think the first spoken word poet that I heard and I took note of was Shibani Das. And Shibani recited this poem called so Shibani recited this poem first up in front of us in one of the gatherings. So I run this group called Poets Collective, and that poem was called "The Cinderella Syndrome." And I can never forget the way throughout that poem she kept advising girls that so if you're 12 and so if you're 14 and you think you're in love with a boy, I want you to stop, and there are so many other things that I want you to think of and listen to and do and engage in. And of course, one of the most beautiful spoken word poets that we've come across in life and who's beautiful inside out. But oh my God, when she takes the mic, she's a fierce lioness. Her name is Sonal. And Sonal, you can Google her. One of her poems is online. It's called The Sex Talk, but that was not the original title. It was called The Inappropriate Poem. And that poem is about all the hard things that you must talk to your children about and not just cloak them, wanting to protect them while you're exposing them to the dangers of ignorance as well as the proneness to make things appear taboo, which are just about natural. And I've recently been going to Bhopal, and I've met a couple of spoken word artists there. Nishant it comes to my mind. He won a certain competition, a national level competition that we launched there last year. And his spoken word poetry in a year or within a year earlier, it transitioned to Hindi as well. And who's to say spoken word can't happen in Hindi or in any other regional language? You follow the same principles. You follow a rhythm. You don't follow traditional stylistics, but you definitely follow a rhythm. So a jazz poetry or a hip hop poetry or something like a rap, they function pretty damn well with spoken word. And another, so many others. Yeah, there are multiple groups in the city. One of my little ones who's a favorite is this girl called Vaishnavi, who's been performing poems about womanhood, about the experience of living and loving. And oh my god, this is little packet full of massive energy which just explodes on stage, and you don't know where to look, and you don't know how to face this child in the eyes who's telling you stuff about the society which bloody hell you've constructed. That's the impact spoken word leaves on us. And yeah, that's mostly stuff that I have to tell you. I'm quickly referring to my notes to see that if I have missed out of anything. No, but that's mostly it. Perhaps if we have any questions, do we have questions? I can just check and see if there is stuff that we can address. All right. So Leha has Leha Divakar. I think I'm speaking your name right. She's posted a comment where she says that is music necessary in spoken word? Hmm. No, in fact, not at all. Of course, I see a couple of these spoken word performances being telecast on Facebook, or being made a video of on Facebook, and some some nonsense is being spoken, but that sounds nice because someone is playing a guitar in the background. Okay, no, don't fall for that. That's a trap. Of course, if the aesthetics of your poem match the aesthetics of music that you're pulling together, then it's great. However, more than music, a certain rhythm and a certain lyricality, if you can construct it, definitely make your poem more worthy of any kind of attention from the audience. Yeah, so no, no, not music. Do we have any other question? Is there anything else that we can address? Can I recite something for you? Oh, I am not a great spoken word artist, yaar. I am. Okay. Can I do fairs? Is that going to be fine? Um. So you must have seen the curtain raiser for this time's Coke Studio season 11, and the curtain raiser included this one composition called "Hum Dekhenge." And I think in the history of the world, that's one of the most impactful spoken word poems, though interestingly not spoken by Faiz himself. So in 84, Faiz died, but in 85, when very, very stringent Islamic norms were imposed on the Pakistani state, Iqbal Bano, and one of those norms were that you won't wear a sari because that's an un-Islamic costume. So Iqbal Bano, the legendary singer, she dons a black sari and she goes in front of a crowd of thousands. And the figure that we are legendarily told is 50,000, stands in the middle of Lahore Stadium and sings Hum Dekhenge. So I wouldn't sing it, but I can just recite it quickly for you कि हम देखेंगे. लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे वो दिन के जिसका वादा है जो लौहे अजल में लिखा है जब जुल्मों सितम के कोहे गरा रुई की तरह उड़ जाएंगे हम महकूमों के पांव तले जब धरती धड़ धड़ धड़केगी और अहले हकम के सर ऊपर जब बिजली कड़कड़ कड़केगी हम देखेंगे लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे. So that's all the recitation I would do for you. It's just I wasn't prepared for this. Anything else that we can address? Or we can some advice in storytelling. Okay, read out prose. Oh, so many. I didn't prepare. I'm not carrying things around me, though there's a wealth of books behind me and I can pick something out. But no. See, the advice in storytelling is the same as advice on any kind of performance. I mean, what do you construct? The most important thing are your words, first of all, 100%, right? What is the piece that you've picked up or you've composed or you've written or you does it match the audience that you're talking to? Are you telling that story to your parents? Are you telling that story to your little brother and sister? Are you reciting or are you performing that story in front of a crowd of second graders or in front of university students? Your audience will change your entire delivery schematic, right? And go back to couple of very very prominent deliveries, right? I mean, I don't know why, but Tamasha's scene in which Ranbir Kapoor makes up this entire allegorical story in which he's telling the story of his life, which is also the story of the lives of so many of us who are uh, driven towards mediocrity, because anything that we do out of the box is scary for those who drive us and who guide us. And imagine how he told that story. Yeah, I think don't ask me to recite something or to narrate something or to read out something, but just go back to that. The way my reading usually happens is with a lot of, and you all need to have your style. So my style is a lot of depth, a lot of bass voice, because that creates a soothing effect on the audience. And knowing my intonations, knowing my modulations, knowing where to stop, where to pause, where to move slightly rapidly, because what you're saying needs to match or the stylistics of how you're saying. So when you talk of something high up there in the atmosphere, your voice sort of rises. And then when night falls and when the stars peep out, because that's a sort of silent time of the day, your voice drops. So yeah, it's very contextual. Sorry, I didn't prepare for this. Any other thing that we can address? Any other questions? I I think. Yeah, so Lavina asked me to recite fairs. I've done fairs, but Lavina knows my other favorite, and she's a friend. So which is Chand Roz aur Meri Jaan, Fakat Chand Hi Roz. I'm so nervous. I forgot the next line, and that never happens. हाँ, चंद रोज और मेरी जान फकत चंद ही रोज जुल्म की छाँव में दम लेने पे मजबूर हैं हम एक जरा और सितम सह लें तड़प लें रो लें अपने अजदाद की मीरास है माजूर हैं हम. So Faiz addresses the people of the day, and he says that it's okay, just a few more days. It's just for a few more days that you need to um bear these atrocities and the injustices, and you have to live them through. But why do you have to live them through? I mean, and he answers that in this one killer line. He says, "Apne ajdad ki miras hai, mazur hai hum." So, which means this is the legacy of your ancestors. For you, you are helpless. We did not inherit the world that we're living through. So, yeah, let me just quickly see the comments. Couple of you are liking this session. Same as free writing. Yes, it's free writing, but because it's public writing, Varun has posted. So because it's public writing, slightly more responsible or responsibility oriented, slightly more focused on the performance and phonetic aesthetics. Like I said, yeah, but it's free. It lets you be. It helps you build an identity and a style. It's immensely liberating, let me tell you that. Once you memorize the poem and you're able to look at the audience in the eye and recite, perform that poem out. Oh my God, it's so liberating. Right? So, yeah, I think I have addressed everything. It's been a while. So can I sign off? It was great being a part of this. I just want to thank the Blogchatter team for calling me on, and the couple of you who did interact with me, you were a lovely audience, and let's stay connected and pose in your questions to Blogchatter later on if there are any. And I'm sure the team and I will get back to you and write and perform and be free. All right, I'm going to sign out. Bye bye.